All right, so now we're going to add alcohol ink patterns to our backgrounds in a bit of a different way. So I've got some alcohol inks down exactly the same as the very first video, so there's no metallics in there and there's no stamping or anything. And we're going to use some alcohol ink markers. Now I have some inexpensive alcohol ink markers here. Any kind will work. I didn't want to chance what was left on my plate ruining tips, so I got an inexpensive set in order to do this with. Now, we're just gonna put impressions into our plate to create different patterns. Now, the shape of the nib, when you just press it down, is kind of like a raindrop. So I'm just putting two of them together and creating a bit of a heart pattern here. And this ink dries super, super quick simply because there's very little ink on there, so you don't have to wait a long time. By the time I'm done, well, really by the time I'm done this print, it's almost ready to do the next one. So that one's just a very simple heart print. I did that with one of these cards, this one here. So that's all it looks like. It's not a lot of print, but it's just a different way to add print and texture to your pieces. So this one here, I'm going to take that shape and I'm going to turn it into flowers. And really it can be whatever shapes you're wanting. For this, I'm only pressing the nib of the pen in. You can draw, and I will go over that in the next printing. For this one, we're just going to use the tip to create our shapes. And obviously I'm using the brush tip. One second, let me finish this flower before I finish what I was going to say. I'm using the brush tip. You could absolutely use the chisel tip and press that in and create whatever pattern. This, I tend to go right to a brick pattern with the chisel just because it works well with it. So I've done some in like a, it's called garnet. Let's do some in purple. And once again, as many or as few as you want. This is just a different way of adding pattern to the back. I am the type of person that I don't tend to use a whole lot of patterned backgrounds, as in pattern paper and really busy prints. I tend to go for something a little bit more subtle, a little bit more subdued. But that's not to say you can't do a version of this or something to create a print with. So now we're just going to pull the print. Put paint on. Going to move it over, give me some space here. And while I'm rolling this out, one thing that I meant to say is my needle nose bottles there, those tops are so fine, I don't really have to worry about the alcohol evaporating from it while I'm working on it. I do put the caps right back on while I'm waiting for things to dry. But typically while I'm in the midst of working on it, I'll just leave the caps off. All right, let's pull them. See how that's just, it's a super subtle print. I mean, you could even do, say, raindrops on it. That would absolutely work as well. And there we've got the flowers. And you can see I had a little bit of the brass or whatever from the print before. But for me, I love that. That's what makes jelly printing interesting, I think. So here's a different way of using that. So rather than putting alcohol inks down first and then doing a print with it, you can use your markers to create a print. So that one I use the brush tip. This one I'm going to use the chisel tip. A different way to get a background, and obviously it's not a super precise plaid. I'm just doing it by hand, and you can see how as I went through the garnet color with the purple, it pulled that color up. So keep in mind that that's going to happen, but it's part of what makes it look interesting. Go, let's let that sit. And now, I mean, This one here is not one that I would necessarily use, but just meant to inspire. So I'm taking those flowers that I made before. I'm using my nib shape as a leaf shape. And I really should have done this one on this so that you could actually see what I was doing, because with the green staining on the plate, you're not able to see it super well. But all I'm doing is just doing some flowers and vines. Again, you can do as much or as little as you want. It's just a different way of using your gel plate. And the purpose of this isn't necessarily because you're going to be using them this way. It's to open your mind and think about what you already have that you can use, what other shapes you can make with alcohol markers, what other backgrounds. If you liked your print enough, you could use that just all on its own for a print. I'm going to create a few little buds here. And then let's do another one on this side. And let's make sure we got a stem to that bud. And then lastly but not least, let's use the marker to create a butterfly. Super simple because the shapes are very simple. But once again, just ways to get you thinking about your supplies a little bit different. So there we go. Let's pull a print. And we actually need to spread the paint before we grab the paper. And you'll notice on some of the alcohol that you use, whether it's the ink or whether it's the markers, some of it just stains right through the paint. That's totally fine. It's not affecting anything. I have a hair sitting in there. I'm not sure if it's on the plate or on my brayer. All right, let's pull the print. There we go. So, I mean, that just on its own is a little card. Add a little sentiment. It could be cute. And that one there with a little die cut in front of it, just a very simple plaid. Now, often this one with the plaid needs to be pulled twice to get it completely off the plate. So let's try it. It looks like it's completely off, but let's just double check. Just because I don't want there to be any of that ink there to affect the next printing. And even this one, it might be plaid, but it might be super subtle. Yeah, there you go. So it is plaid. It's got some plaid on it, but it's really subtle. You could use that as a background, or you could die cut it or whatever. But there you go. Different way of using alcohol markers with your plate. So in our last section of jelly printing, we're going to use some other ways of getting texture and using it with your alcohol inks. I'll see you there.